There's something curious about staying quiet in our modern digital world. We exist in an era where nearly everything gets broadcasted online. Morning coffee, birthday celebrations, beautiful sunsets, tears of joy, moments of laughter, even our struggles wrapped in carefully chosen filters. But some individuals remain completely hidden from view. They browse silently, watch carefully, yet almost never share anything themselves. You probably know someone who lives this way. Perhaps you're that person. And there's always this lingering curiosity in everyone's mind. Why? What makes someone deliberately choose invisibility when it seems like everyone else is competing for attention? Many people quickly assume that those who avoid posting must be timid or naturally introverted. But that's an incomplete understanding. When you look deeper, there's a fascinating psychological landscape unfolding. One that reveals essential truths about human behavior, how we see ourselves, and the subtle resistance against a society fixated on being constantly visible. You see, for certain individuals, staying quiet isn't about having nothing to express. It's about maintaining control. It's the freedom to decide what remains private from public knowledge. Because whether we acknowledge it or not, social media platforms have gradually transformed how we construct our identities. These platforms celebrate visibility. They reward those who make noise. Yet, those who remain in the background are frequently the ones who perceive reality most accurately. They observe without feeling compelled to interrupt. They reflect carefully before responding. They consider situations thoroughly before forming judgments. Research psychologists have discovered something remarkable. Individuals who deliberately limit their online posting often demonstrate elevated levels of self-control, reflective thinking, and emotional self-sufficiency. They're typically less affected by social comparison theory and don't rely heavily on external validation. Put differently, they're not attempting to demonstrate their identity to others. They're focused on discovering it for themselves. And in a society oversaturated with performance, that's incredibly uncommon. Let's be completely honest here. Most content we publish isn't simply communication, it's strategic identity construction. It's an unspoken tryout for acceptance and belonging. Every written caption, every uploaded photograph, every status announcement essentially asks, "This represents who I am. Do you accept me?" However, when you discontinue posting, something fundamental transforms. You start disconnecting your self-worth from digital approval. You stop mentally composing captions for everything. You begin truly experiencing moments for your own benefit rather than for capturing them through a camera lens. And that's the underlying psychology behind many individuals who avoid posting. They desperately seek genuine authenticity in an environment where everything appears artificial and staged. They don't despise social media platforms. They simply cannot locate their authentic selves within that space anymore. It's not about rejecting technology or avoiding human connection. It's about refusing to compress your entire existence into carefully curated highlights. Because once you've witnessed how effortlessly perception can be manipulated online, you start cherishing what cannot be photographed or shared. Genuine silence, emotional depth, beautiful imperfections, unfiltered truth. For some people, the choice to stop posting emerges after experiencing a form of digital burnout. Perhaps they once shared everything enthusiastically until one moment it stopped feeling authentic. They suddenly realized that every time they published something meaningful, they experienced an unspoken obligation to continuously outperform themselves. They weren't genuinely living their lives anymore. They were putting on a constant performance. So, they withdrew quietly. No dramatic farewell announcement, just a gradual fading from the social media feed. But here's what frequently gets misinterpreted. Avoiding posting doesn't indicate emotional emptiness. It doesn't suggest they're indifferent to life. Quite often, it actually means they care profoundly about genuine presence, about discovering real meaning, about safeguarding what feels sacred to them. There exists a psychological concept called psychological ownership. It describes the sensation that something belongs intimately to you, a personal thought, a cherished memory, a lived experience. And when you publish it online, that sense of personal ownership diminishes slightly. That moment transforms into shared public property, vulnerable to criticism, misunderstanding, and even ridicule. Therefore, people who refrain from posting are frequently protecting their sense of ownership over their own lives. They maintain their experiences untouchable, completely private, and pure. And perhaps that's not depression or social withdrawal. Perhaps it's a subtle form of genuine freedom. Because consider this carefully. When was the most recent time you experienced something truly meaningful and didn't immediately feel that automatic impulse to share it? When did you last laugh genuinely, cry deeply, or accomplish something significant without instantly considering posting about it online? That reflexive action, that compulsive need to display everything, isn't natural human behavior. It's been systematically conditioned. It's the consequence of an entire decade of likes, shares, and dopamine reward loops, training our neural pathways to mentally equate validation with inherent value. And when someone consciously steps outside that entire system, it might appear like rebellion, but it's simultaneously a healing process. They begin rediscovering the beautiful simplicity of doing things purely for themselves again, preparing meals without photographing them, traveling to places without tagging locations, experiencing emotions without feeling obligated to explain them publicly. Within that intentional space, something powerful awakens. A form of genuine self-awareness that doesn't require an audience to validate its existence. However, not everyone who avoids posting does so from a place of inner peace. Some are fundamentally motivated by fear, the fear of harsh judgment, painful rejection, or being completely misunderstood. Social media has significantly amplified what psychologists identify as self-presentational anxiety. It's the persistent awareness that you're constantly being observed and evaluated, even when you're not actively participating. And for many individuals, that's mentally and emotionally exhausting. They worry intensely that their words might be misinterpreted, or, perhaps worse, completely ignored by others. So, they withdraw inward, not because they genuinely don't want connection, but because the psychological cost of visibility feels unbearably high. They desire to be truly seen, but only authentically, never superficially. And ironically, sometimes the most silent people online actually have the most powerful thoughts processing internally. They're not absent or disengaged. They're emotionally overflowing. They simply choose stillness and reflection instead of spectacle and performance. There's a profound philosophical dimension to that deliberate silence. In a world that constantly screams, "Look at me," choosing invisibility becomes a powerful form of self-definition. It communicates, "My existence transcends your perception of me." They might scroll through other people's curated lives, occasionally nodding in recognition, smiling gently, sometimes experiencing emotional pain, but they rarely project themselves outward because they comprehend something most people don't. Not everything you personally experience is intended to be publicly witnessed. Sometimes life's most profound experiences, genuine personal growth, deep grief, complete transformation, occur quietly, unseen, and unposted. And when you've lived through enough of those intensely private transformations, you gradually start recognizing that being unseen doesn't equate to being insignificant or worthless. Actually, it's precisely where authentic identity gets genuinely formed rather than artificially performed. This is where a fascinating paradox exists. Social media platforms were specifically designed to connect humanity. Yet, they frequently leave countless people feeling more profoundly isolated than ever before. When you stop posting regularly, you cease chasing superficial digital closeness and begin rebuilding genuine real-world connections. You start noticing which people check in on you personally without requiring public updates. You discover who genuinely remembers you without needing reminders. That particular kind of connection, raw, unbroadcasted, deeply personal, feels significantly heavier, warmer, and infinitely more authentic. And the people who deliberately don't post, they actively inhabit that space. They carefully build meaningful relationships that don't require photographic proof. They discover comfort in moments left unshared, and they allow life to naturally unfold without converting every experience into consumable content. Part of this phenomenon relates to what psychologists call identity security. Truly knowing who you fundamentally are even when absolutely nobody's watching or validating you. When you're genuinely comfortable in your own solitary company, you don't require an audience to validate your inherent worth. That's not arrogance or superiority, it's inner peace. And ironically, these same individuals who avoid posting frequently possess the most fascinating stories to share. But they deliberately save them for when you're sitting directly across the table from them, not viewing them across a digital screen. Because authentic connection to them isn't quantified in comments or measured in likes. It exists in comfortable shared silence, in eyes truly meeting, in spontaneous laughter that doesn't require external witnesses. These are individuals who carry entire universes within themselves, who process experiences deeply, observe their surroundings constantly, and understand situations quietly. They don't require the entire world to applaud their existence. They simply need to genuinely live it. And maybe, just maybe, in a world so desperately hungry to be constantly seen, their intentional silence isn't a personal flaw or weakness. It's actually a mirror, a gentle reminder that not everything meaningful must be publicly shared, that sometimes the most profoundly human action you can take is keeping something entirely, completely for yourself. You know what's genuinely fascinating? The longer someone remains disconnected from social media, the more dramatically they begin perceiving the world differently. Colors appear more vibrant and rich. Time seems to move more slowly. Conversations feel significantly fuller and more meaningful. It's as if deliberately stepping away from the constant digital noise makes everything feel authentically real again. Because when you stop performing constantly, you genuinely start experiencing life. There's a quiet, understated beauty in moving through life without requiring photographic proof of every single step. You're not mentally calculating angles or considering lighting or mentally drafting captions. You're simply there, fully present, completely alive, existing inside the moment rather than observing it from outside. And that's something social media platforms rarely permit us to experience anymore. But the psychological foundation behind this phenomenon extends deeper than simple personal preference or taste. It's fundamentally rooted in how our neural systems process validation mechanisms. Every single time we post something online and it receives attention, likes, comments, heart reactions, our brain releases dopamine, the identical neurochemical involved in reward processing and behavioral addiction. Over extended time, we begin actively craving that external validation. We start mentally thinking in terms of shareable experiences rather than genuinely real ones. Now, imagine someone who actively resists that entire neurological loop, someone who deliberately chooses to disconnect completely from the dopamine reward cycle. That's not simple disinterest or apathy. That's genuine self-discipline. It requires substantial self-awareness to actively resist something specifically engineered to maintain your engagement. People who deliberately don't post frequently possess what psychologists term a strong internal locus of control, a psychological concept indicating their fundamental sense of worth and happiness originates from within themselves, not from external approval or validation. They don't require the digital echo constantly reinforcing you're enough to genuinely believe it. And here's what's even more scientifically interesting. Research studies demonstrate that people who intentionally take extended breaks from posting or consuming social media content frequently experience measurable increases in emotional stability and overall life satisfaction. Because when your sense of personal identity is no longer being constantly reflected back to you through external sources, it becomes solid and stable. It becomes authentically real. You're no longer mentally editing your entire life into something easily digestible for public consumption. You're genuinely living it in all its chaotic, beautiful, completely unfiltered complexity. And perhaps that's the genuine rebellion here, remaining whole and integrated in a world that systematically rewards fragmentation. But maintaining silence online doesn't automatically guarantee inner serenity. Sometimes it conceals profound exhaustion. For many individuals, social media initially became a space where they actively sought meaningful connection, but ultimately ended up feeling emotionally drained instead. There exists a subtle but persistent emotional fatigue that develops from constantly witnessing everyone else's carefully curated highlight reels, while you're still struggling to piece together your own messy behind-the-scenes reality. You begin comparing yourself even when you consciously don't intend to. You start questioning your fundamental worth even when you intellectually know better, and eventually, some people consciously decide to step away, not motivated by bitterness or resentment, but driven by essential self-preservation. They come to realize they don't owe the entire world a constant performance. They don't owe anyone an explanation for their silence, and they don't need to continuously prove they're happy just to be believed by others. That's one of the quiet, uncomfortable truths of this generation. We've fundamentally confused visibility with inherent value. We automatically assume that to genuinely matter, we must be constantly noticed. But real meaning and significance don't require witnesses. Some of life's most meaningful moments, the ones that fundamentally shape who you become, will occur without a single person watching. No cameras present, no captions written, no audience observing, just you existing. And perhaps that's what those who deliberately don't post understand most profoundly. They recognize that privacy isn't loneliness or isolation. It's genuine intimacy with yourself. Because when you stop broadcasting every passing thought, you gradually start hearing your own internal voice again. You begin reconnecting with the aspects of yourself that became lost in all the noise. Your quiet personal desires, your unspoken deep fears, your internal moral compass. And that's something profoundly spiritual in today's hyper-connected world. It's not social withdrawal or avoidance. It's a homecoming to yourself. Naturally, it's not always peaceful or comfortable. There exist moments of self-doubt, of wondering whether your silence renders you invisible, whether you're somehow falling behind while everyone else appears to be performing constant progress. But with sufficient time, you start noticing something genuinely beautiful. Your inherent worth doesn't vanish or disappear when nobody's actively looking at you. It remains there, steady and constant, like the gentle hum of a completely quiet room following a powerful storm. And perhaps that's what genuine confidence actually resembles. Not the loud public declaration of self online, but the calm internal assurance of self offline. Some people sarcastically say, "If you didn't post it online, did it even actually happen?" But the fundamental truth is this: the experiences that shape you most profoundly rarely appear on social media feeds. Your personal growth, your heartbreaks, your private victories, your quiet acts of kindness, they exist permanently in memory, not in digital media. And perhaps that's entirely enough. When psychologists discuss authentic self-expression, they consistently emphasize congruence, the psychological alignment between who you genuinely are internally and who you present to the external world. But in our current age, dominated by digital filters and editing, that natural alignment becomes constantly distorted. You gradually begin living as a carefully curated version of yourself designed specifically for approval. So when someone deliberately chooses not to post, it might represent their method of maintaining congruence, of preserving that fragile truth between their inner and outer worlds. They don't require everyone to witness what they're experiencing to validate that it's authentically real. They don't need to capture every beautiful sunset to permanently remember how it emotionally felt. They live their lives fully and quietly. And here's the fascinating paradox. Those who live most quietly often experience life most intensely. They're not mentally distracted by the performance aspect of existence. They naturally absorb details others consistently miss. The subtle way natural light changes across a wall, the meaningful pause before someone speaks honestly, the distant sound of genuine laughter. They remain genuinely present. An authentic presence represents the rarest currency in a world constructed entirely on capturing attention. But sometimes that very presence makes them frequently misunderstood by others. People might incorrectly label them as emotionally detached, unnecessarily mysterious, even cold. or aloof. Yet, if you observe more closely, their silence isn't internal emptiness. It's profound depth. It's the natural calm that emerges from no longer needing to constantly explain yourself to feel understood. There exists a quiet confidence that develops from not needing to be known by absolutely everyone, just genuinely understood by a meaningful few. And that's what people who deliberately don't post understand best. They recognize that not every personal truth is intended for the massive crowd, that some fundamental parts of yourself deserve to remain completely untouched by algorithms and public opinions. Because once something becomes publicly shared, it stops being purely yours alone. It becomes subject to interpretation, to judgment, to trending cycles, and perhaps some moments feel too sacred for that treatment.